From Ubereem, shrinking down like a deflated balloon,
Not a lot of people burning up Mick Maynard's phone to try to get a matchup with a
to Rampage Jackson trading knockouts for knockwurst.
April 28th. That's going to be just an incredible fight between the experts.
The transformations are as shocking as the fights they once won. Here are the 20 fighters who clearly lose their physique after leaving UFC. 1. BJ Penn. BJ Penn used to be one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC. People called him the Prodigy because he was a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at just 21 years old, and his skills were unreal. In his prime, he was fast, flexible, and fearless. He didn't have big muscles like some other fighters, but his body was perfect for speed and movement. He had a strong core, wide shoulders, and his style was smooth and flowing. But after a while, things started going downhill. BJ announced his retirement a few times, but he always came back. The problem was, every time he returned, he looked slower and weaker. His body started to lose shape, his muscles were fading, and his speed was gone. You could tell he wasn't training the same way anymore.
All the blood, all the tears, all the sweat, all the ups and downs, all the good media, all the bad media, all of that was to prepare
His stomach got rounder, his face fuller, and he didn't have that warrior energy in his eyes anymore. His movements, once smooth and deadly, now looked stiff and awkward. Things weren't just bad in the cage. His personal life was getting messy too. There were reports of bar fights, arrests, and legal troubles. It seemed like BJ was struggling a lot outside the octagon. Fans were shocked when they saw pictures of him after 2020. He looked bloated, tired, and nothing like the champion he once was. He had a slouched posture and seemed completely disconnected from the fight game. 2. Johnny Hendricks. Johnny Hendricks was a beast in the UFC when he was at his best. They called him Big Rig because he hit like a truck. His punches were like explosions, and his wrestling was top level thanks to his NCAA background. Back in his prime, especially around 2014, Hendricks looked like a powerhouse. He had a thick chest, solid arms, and legs that looked like they could knock down a wall. At 170 pounds, he was a tank, strong, fast, and dangerous. His fights with guys like Robbie Lawler and Georges St-Pierre were all-out wars, and fans loved his never-quit attitude. But then, things started falling apart. One of the biggest problems was his weight. Hendricks began having a hard time making weight for fights. He missed weight more than once, and that hurt his career a lot. He eventually moved up to middleweight, 185 pounds, but he didn't look the same at all. His body became softer, less muscular, and he looked slower. The strong and explosive version of Hendricks was gone. Instead of looking like a fighter, he started to look like a regular guy who hadn't been to the gym in a while.
About a potential failure to make weight, but in the end,
after the UFC let him go in 2018, it got worse. Photos of Hendricks began to pop up online, and fans couldn't believe how much he had changed. He had a big belly, his arms and chest had lost all their muscle, and he looked like he hadn't trained in forever. People joked about his love for food, especially barbecue and fast food. Some fans even started calling him Big Rib instead of Big Rig, saying he left fighting to chase barbecue instead of championship belts. 3. Tito Ortiz. Tito Ortiz was one of the most popular fighters during the early days of the UFC. Back then, he was known for his big attitude, crazy energy, and wild feuds with fighters like Ken Shamrock and Chuck Liddell. But he wasn't just all talk. Tito was a real problem inside the cage. He had a solid wrestling base and was known for ground and pound, which basically means he would take people down and smash them with punches and elbows. In his prime, Tito had that typical wrestler look. Broad shoulders, thick neck, ripped core, and lean muscles that didn't just look good, but worked well in fights. He looked like he was built to wrestle people down and keep them there. But as the years passed and he left the UFC, things changed. Tito kept fighting in other organizations like Bellator and Triller, but fans could see he wasn't the same. His body didn't have those sharp lines anymore.
Leave a legacy behind me that I've helped people, that I've been a factor in somebody's life in a positive manner. And knowing that
His arms and chest looked softer, and his stomach got bulkier. He didn't move the same way either. His speed and cardio weren't as strong. Even though he still trained and even fought Anderson Silva in a boxing match, his performance looked more like a dad trying to keep up at the gym than the badass fighter we all remembered. One big reason people think Tito changed so much physically is age, of course, but also the lack of TRT, testosterone replacement therapy. When fighters get older, their natural testosterone drops, and without extra help, it's really hard to keep the same body. Or Vitor Belfort. Vitor Belfort was a freak of nature in his prime. People called him the Phenom because of how fast and explosive he was, especially when he was young. He started fighting in the UFC when he was just 19, and right away, everyone could see he was special. But the version of Vitor that scared people the most came later, around 2013, during what fans call the TRT era. TRT stands for testosterone replacement therapy, and during that time, Belfort looked like a real-life superhero. His muscles were huge, his veins popped out like crazy, and his whole body looked carved out of stone. He was knocking people out with insane kicks and punches and looked completely unstoppable.
Vitor is wearing shoes, so he will not be able to strike with the feet. Oh, he does with the hands, though! Vitor Belfort is the winner!
But in 2014, the UFC banned TRT, and that changed everything for Belfort. Suddenly, he didn't look like a superhero anymore. His muscles weren't as big, his veins weren't as visible, and his whole body looked softer. It was obvious that without the help of TRT, it was harder for him to recover, train hard, and keep that monster physique. Even his face changed. It got rounder and less sharp, and he just didn't have that same intense look. After leaving the UFC, Belfort still fought a bit. He signed with one championship, though he didn't fight there, and boxed Evander Holyfield in 2021. He still looked strong, but not like before. His waist was thicker, and his arms didn't have the same shape or power. 5. Alistair Ubereem. Alistair Ubereem's transformation in MMA is one of the craziest ever. When he first started fighting, he was in the light heavyweight division and looked like a regular, lean fighter. But around 2009, everything changed. He moved up to heavyweight, and his body became completely different. Fans started calling him Ubereem because he looked like something out of a comic book. Massive traps, huge arms, rock-hard chest, and shredded abs. He said it was from eating horse meat, but most people believed it was because of performance-enhancing drugs or heavy testosterone use. Either way, he looked like the scariest man on the planet. In fights, he used powerful knees, brutal punches, and insane strength to destroy opponents. His body didn't just look good, it worked. But when the UFC partnered with USADA in 2015, drug testing became serious, and Ubereem started to shrink. He couldn't rely on brute strength as much, so he became a smarter, more technical fighter. He still won big fights, but fans kept noticing how different he looked. When the UFC let him go in 2021, he went back to kickboxing. In 2022, he had a match in Glory Kickboxing, and people were shocked by how much he had changed. He looked smaller, older, and slower.
Not a lot of people burning up Mick Maynard's phone to try to get a matchup with him. Got it! Down goes the Reem!
6. Wanderlei Silva. Wanderlei Silva was one of the scariest fighters to ever step into a cage. People called him the Axe Murderer because of how he fought, with wild punches, crazy clinch knees, and non-stop pressure. When you saw him walking to the ring during his Pride days, it was like watching a monster enter the arena. His face was intense, always staring like he wanted to destroy someone. His muscles matched that energy too. Shredded torso, thick neck, and powerful shoulders. His body looked like it was built for violence. Even during stare downs, with veins popping from his forehead and his jaw clenched tight, he looked like someone you didn't want to mess with. But once his UFC run slowed down, things started to change. In 2014, Wanderlei literally ran away from a drug test, which made a lot of people wonder what was going on. After that, his fighting career started going downhill.
Here might be the first time for Wanderlei to utilize the clinch in the knees. Good left by Chuck.
He wasn't the same physical freak anymore. His muscles got softer, and his arms and chest lost the sharp cuts they used to have. His face even looked puffier and less scary. Even when he fought in Bellator later, he didn't move like the old Wanderlei. He still looked strong, but he didn't have that raw speed and power that made him so feared before. 7. Frank Mir. Frank Mir was one of the toughest heavyweights in UFC history. He was known for breaking arms and pulling off crazy submissions that most big guys couldn't even think about doing. When he snapped Tim Sylvia's arm with an armbar, fans couldn't believe it. Frank had amazing jiu-jitsu skills for a heavyweight, but he also had knockout power, like when he beat Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira with punches. In his prime, Frank wasn't the most ripped fighter, but he had a thick, powerful build. Between 2008 and 2010, he was in great shape. He had broad shoulders, a strong chest, and looked solid from head to toe, like a big, strong tank ready for war. But after his UFC days ended in 2010, things really changed. Frank moved on to Bellator and even tried some boxing, but his body looked way different. He gained a lot of weight, and not in a good way.
Distance. Frank Mir looks very calm and collected here. And Brock immediately goes for the takedown. Frank dives down. He's got a hold of a leg.
And he slips to half guard.
His face got rounder, his stomach got bigger, and he didn't have the same muscle definition he used to. At one point, he even admitted he was over 300 pounds and said he was struggling with eating too much and not having the same routine he did during his fight career. 8. Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez was one of the wildest and most fearless fighters in UFC history. When he stepped into the cage, you never knew what was going to happen, but you knew it would be crazy. He fought like a madman, throwing punches non-stop and never backing down, no matter who he was fighting. Whether it was Clay Guida, Nick Diaz, or Gilbert Melendez, Diego went to war with them. His body matched his style, lean, strong, and built for chaos. He had a shredded frame, not bulky, but super fit. His core was strong, his muscles were defined, and his cardio seemed endless. He looked like someone who trained to fight nonstop for hours. But after his long UFC career came to an end in 2021, Diego's physical appearance started to change a lot. He began to look thinner and way less muscular.
Melendez has more fluidity to his punches, Mike.
In interviews and training videos, fans noticed that his arms didn't have the same shape. His core was softer, and his face looked tired. The crazy, intense look he used to have in his eyes seemed gone, replaced by someone who looked drained and even confused at times. A lot of people think his decline started when he teamed up with a controversial coach named Joshua Fabia. Around 2020, Diego's training changed a lot, and fans got really worried about him. The way he talked and moved felt off, and some thought his mental and physical health were going downhill. When he later competed in bare-knuckle fighting, people were shocked. He looked super lean, almost too skinny, and nothing like the Diego they remembered from his wars in the UFC. 9. Chuck Liddell. Chuck Liddell was one of the coolest and scariest guys in the UFC during the 2000s. He had this crazy mohawk, a tattoo on the side of his head, and a stare that could freeze anyone. That's why they called him the Iceman. He didn't just look tough, he fought like a warrior. Chuck had knockout power in both hands, and he loved to brawl. His style wasn't fancy, but it worked. He kept a wide stance, moved forward, and knocked people out cold. His body wasn't like a bodybuilder's, but it was strong and powerful. He had big arms, a strong chest, and his back showed the strength from years of wrestling and striking. He looked like someone who was always ready for war. But after he retired in 2010, Chuck started to change. He had already taken a lot of damage, especially knockout losses, and his body began to show it. He stayed big, but not in the same way. His muscles weren't sharp anymore, and his stomach started to stick out. His face lost its strong features and started looking more puffy and tired. When he made a comeback in 2018 to fight Tito Ortiz, people were shocked. He looked stiff, slow, and honestly kind of fragile. That old fire just wasn't there anymore.
And I get punched and I get out of the way of their positions, so I'm really excited for the fight.
Chuck still kept the mohawk and kept training, but at 48 years old, his body couldn't do what it used to. You could tell he loved fighting, but time had taken its toll. His reaction speed was gone, and his punches didn't have the same snap. Watching that last fight was hard for fans who remembered how scary and powerful the Iceman used to be. 10. Cain Velasquez. Cain Velasquez was a total monster in the UFC heavyweight division. He wasn't just strong, he had insane cardio for such a big guy. That's why they called him Cardio Cain. Most heavyweights slow down after a round or two, but Cain just kept coming. He never got tired, always pushed the pace, and could wrestle or punch non-stop. His fights with Junior Dos Santos and Brock Lesnar were legendary. Cain's body was thick and powerful, especially his legs and core. He didn't look super ripped, but he was solid and strong from top to bottom. He looked like someone built for pressure, for breaking opponents mentally and physically. But things started changing when injuries kept hitting him. He had bad knees, back problems, and surgeries that kept him out of action for long periods. By 2015, those injuries started catching up. His last UFC fight in 2017 ended fast, with a knockout loss to Francis Ngannou. After that, Cain just didn't seem like himself anymore. His body thickened, his muscles weren't as tight, and he lost that explosiveness that once made him a nightmare for other fighters.
It just gives out. Ooh, right there. Just gave out, just slipped, gave out, and then started eating some huge punches.
He went on to try professional wrestling, joining WWE and doing lucha libre. But even there, fans could tell he was slower and bulkier. His once legendary gas tank didn't show the same energy, and his body just looked heavier and less athletic. Then, in 2022, everything changed, even more when Cain got arrested for serious charges. His mugshots and court appearances showed a man who looked completely different. His face looked thin, he seemed tired, and that powerful Cain was gone. 11. Rousimar Palhares. Rausimar Palhares, also known as Toquinho, was one of the most feared fighters when it came to leg locks. The guy had unreal grip strength, like he could break a brick with his hands. In his prime, he looked like a cartoon character. He wasn't super tall, but he was packed with muscle. His arms, especially his forearms, were massive. Fans used to joke that he looked like he was drawn by a comic book artist. His whole build was stocky, thick, and powerful, like a tree trunk that could walk. But after leaving the UFC, things got rough for him. He had a lot of controversy over not letting go of submissions after his opponents tapped, which got him banned from multiple promotions. Then came long breaks from fighting, and his body started to change. By 2018, Palhares looked much bigger, but not in the same good way. He wasn't lean and powerful anymore. He was just bulky, with way more weight on his frame than before. He even said in interviews that cutting down to welterweight, 170 pounds, was almost killing him. At one point, he was walking around at 212 pounds, which is a big jump. His once chiseled arms and ripped back turned soft. He still had size, but not the kind that helped in a fight. His speed dropped, and his muscle definition faded. You could see that he still trained, but without regular fights or the strict weight-cut lifestyle, he couldn't keep the same form. His face also looked puffier, and his energy wasn't as wild as before. 12. Shane Carwin. Shane Carwin was one of the scariest heavyweights to ever step into the UFC. He wasn't just big, he was built like a tank. Standing at 6'2" and weighing around 254 pounds, Carwin looked like someone you'd never want to mess with. His muscles were huge, and his arms looked like they could crush anything. But what made him even cooler was the fact that he had a background in engineering. So not only could he knock people out in under a minute, but he was also super smart. He had a crazy MMA record of 12 wins and just 2 losses, with almost all of his wins coming by first-round knockouts.
Right here by Gonzaga. Now again, he gets in trouble. His eyes just rolled there, Mike. He is looking right this direction. And as we said before, if Gonzaga can take him to the ground.
But everything changed when injuries started piling up. In 2013, Carwin retired from MMA because his body just couldn't take it anymore. After that, his health started getting worse. His former training partner, Brendan Schaub, said something really sad. He said Shane had problems doing simple things like tying his own shoes. That's because of something called CTE, which is brain damage from taking too many hits to the head. For a guy who once looked like a superhero, this was heartbreaking to hear. On top of all that, Shane started having financial problems too. He wasn't fighting anymore, and his health issues made it hard to work. Some reports said he had to ask for help publicly just to get by. It's crazy to think that someone who once stood at the top of the fight world was now struggling to do everyday things. 13. Quinton Rampage Jackson. Back in the day, Quinton Rampage Jackson was one of the coolest fighters in MMA. He had it all. Huge muscles, knockout power, crazy energy, and that big chain he wore around his neck during walkouts. He was loud, fun to watch, and loved trash talk. Whether he was slamming people through the mat or trading punches with legends like Chuck Liddell and Wanderlei Silva, Rampage brought excitement every time he fought. In his prime, he had the perfect fighter body, broad shoulders, big arms, ripped chest, and a strong, tight core. He looked like he could destroy anyone who got in his way. But as time passed and Rampage left the UFC, his body began to change a lot. He went on to fight in Bellator and Risen, but it was clear that the old Rampage was gone. His weight went up, especially when he moved to heavyweight. During his rematch with Wanderlei Silva in 2018, he looked heavier than ever.
April 28th. That's going to be just an incredible fight between the ex-Pride heavyweight champion and the ex-UFC heavyweight.
His belly stuck out, and his arms, while still big, were no longer muscular. They were just thick. He was slower, less explosive, and seemed like a totally different guy. By the time he fought Fedor Emelianenko in 2019, Rampage looked almost unrecognizable. He weighed over 265 pounds and moved like someone who hadn't trained hard in a long time. He even admitted after the fight that he felt embarrassed by how he looked and performed. His once sharp jawline was now soft and puffy, and the lean Street Fighter vibe he had was totally gone. 14. Roy Nelson. Roy Nelson was never the type of fighter who looked like a model or bodybuilder. He had a big belly, a wild beard, and looked more like a dude who runs a BBQ joint than a professional athlete. But man, could he fight. Don't let the belly fool you. Roy had a chin made of granite and a right hand that could knock out anyone. He was super popular because he was different. He didn't care what people thought about how he looked, and he always came to throw down. He shocked everyone by winning The Ultimate Fighter Season 10, and fans loved his big country nickname and his underdog vibe. During his UFC run, Roy stayed at around 250 pounds. He wasn't fast, but he had sneaky jiu-jitsu and surprisingly quick hands for a guy his size.
And we're underway.
Arlovsky with the low kicks. Smart moves on the low kicks.
He didn't look fit, but he could go the distance and take shots like a tank. His body might have been soft on the outside, but he was tough as nails on the inside. After he left the UFC in 2017, things started to change. Roy fought in Bellator and other smaller events, but his weight kept going up. He started fighting at over 265 pounds, and his body began to slow down big time. In his last few fights, like the ones against Matt Mitrione and Valentin Moldavsky, he looked bloated, tired, and way less mobile. His famous belly got even bigger, and the beard couldn't hide the fact that he was struggling to keep up. 15. Gray Maynard. Gray Maynard was once one of the strongest lightweights in the UFC. People called him the bully because of his wrestling heavy style and how he would pressure his opponents non-stop. He was super intense, and you could always tell he came to fight. He was in some of the best fights ever, like his war with Frankie Edgar at UFC 125. It was pure chaos and heart. Gray had a powerful wrestler's body. He looked jacked at 155 pounds with wide shoulders, a ripped core, thick legs, and a strong back. Even at weigh-ins, he looked like a machine. Like every muscle had a purpose. He wasn't flashy, but had the kind of build that came from pure hard work and wrestling grind. But after he left the UFC in 2018, fans started noticing big changes. Gray didn't get fat like some retired fighters. Instead, he looked super thin.
Labor, nice jab though. Again stopped.
His arms looked smaller, his face looked older and more tired, and he had this almost sick look. People said he looked more like a featherweight than a former lightweight powerhouse. It was weird seeing someone who used to be so strong now looking like he hadn't hit the gym in months. Some of this probably came from injuries and concussions he suffered over the years. He had a lot of tough fights and took serious damage. That kind of stuff catches up with you. Gray has also talked openly about struggling with depression and mental health after fighting. 16. Mark Coleman. Mark Coleman was one of the original beasts of MMA. Back in the 90s, he was known for smashing people on the ground and using pure strength to control his fights. That's why people called him the Hammer. He was the first UFC heavyweight champion and the guy who pretty much invented ground and pound. When you saw him, you couldn't believe a human could look that strong. He had a chest like a barrel, arms like tree trunks, and muscles popping out from everywhere. His neck was so thick it looked like it could hold up a building. Coleman looked like a comic book character. He was the definition of brute force, but after he retired around 2010, his body went downhill fast. Age, injuries, and the wear and tear from all the years of fighting finally caught up with him.
Heading back to the hospital again, third time in a month. Dislocated my hip, wasn't doing anything, so...
When fans saw him at events in the mid-2010s, they were shocked. He looked like a completely different person. The massive chest and arms were gone. His back was hunched, and he walked slowly. His muscles had melted away, and he looked more like someone's tired grandpa than a guy who used to dominate cages in 2 countries. He didn't just deal with aging, he went through some real health battles. In 2020, he had a heart attack and was rushed to the hospital. Luckily, he survived, and since then, 17. Ken Shamrock. Ken Shamrock used to look like a real-life superhero. In the 90s and early 2000s, when he walked out to the cage, he looked absolutely jacked. He had giant biceps, a six-pack, shoulders that looked like armor, and veins popping out of his arms like he was pumped full of electricity. With his sculpted face and intense stare, he looked like someone out of a video game. That's why people called him the world's most dangerous man. He was scary just to look at, and his submission skills made him even scarier once the fight started. But like a lot of fighters from that era, Ken's insane body didn't last forever. He admitted to using steroids, and eventually, stricter testing caught up with him.
I mean, I never denied it, as far as it being there. It was what it was. And I didn't make excuses of why I did it, right?
As he got older and had to stop using those substances, his body changed fast. The muscles started to shrink, his arms and chest lost their shape, and his six-pack faded. His midsection got thicker, and the sharp superhero look was gone. Now in his 50s and 60s, Shamrock still tries to stay in shape, but you can tell he's not the same. His face looks fuller, and he stands more hunched over than he used to. The big traps and comic book muscles have deflated, and while he's still strong for his age, he's not the freak of nature people remember. When he appears in interviews or at events now, he looks like a coach or gym owner, someone who still trains, but isn't getting ready to fight anymore. 18. Antonio Bigfoot Silva. Antonio Bigfoot Silva used to be one of the most terrifying heavyweights in MMA. He was huge, standing at 6'4" with massive shoulders, thick legs, and a powerful core. He never had a ripped six-pack, but he was still one of the scariest looking fighters because of his size and strength. His condition, called acromegaly, made his hands, feet, and facial bones grow larger than normal. That gave him a unique look. His face was broad, and his jaw was massive. Even if you didn't know who he was, just seeing him would make you think twice about messing with him. In his prime, Bigfoot had enough strength to go head-to-head with legends like Cain Velasquez, Alistair Overeem, and Fedor Emelianenko. His fight with Mark Hunt in 2013 was one of the wildest heavyweight fights ever. Blood, punches, and heart. It had everything. But after he left the UFC in 2017, everything went downhill fast. Bigfoot started looking different. His body seemed bloated, not strong. His arms lost their shape, his belly looked looser, and he didn't move the same. The power and speed that made him dangerous were gone.
You can't tell he's going to throw it, and then you lift it up in an uppercut or hooking fashion.
Things got worse when he kept fighting and losing, badly. He lost more than 10 fights in a row, most of them by knockout. Each time, fans and fighters begged him to retire. People were scared for him. His face got puffier, his reflexes slower, and he looked like he was getting seriously hurt. Watching him in bare-knuckle fights and tiny MMA events was painful. He used to look like a giant warrior. Now he looked like he was struggling just to stay standing. 19. Paulo Costa. Paulo Costa, known as Borrachinha, or the Eraser, is one of those fighters you can't miss, literally. In his prime, his body looked unreal. He had gigantic arms, shredded abs, a thick chest, and veins popping out like he just stepped off a movie set. Fans used to joke that Costa looked like he was built in a lab. At weigh-ins, people would stare because he looked more like a bodybuilder than a UFC fighter, but he could fight too. He crushed opponents with pressure, power, and non-stop aggression. In 2019, he looked unstoppable. But around 2021 and 22, things started to change. Costa had contract issues with the UFC and wasn't fighting as often. During that time, fans started noticing his body didn't look quite the same. He was still fit, but he wasn't the same muscle monster. His traps and arms weren't as big, and the deep muscle cuts in his abs were fading. People on social media said he looked smaller, like he might have stopped using some supplements or even PEDs during his break. The difference wasn't huge, but it was clear if you followed him closely. He still looked good, but more like a regular athlete than a human tank. Some fans said he went from looking like a superhero to just a really fit guy. During that break, his face also looked a bit softer, and he didn't have the same puffed up, super pumped look. 20. Anderson Silva. Anderson Silva, the Spider, is one of the greatest fighters ever. In his prime, he wasn't super muscular or bulky, but he had something even better: movement, balance, and insane striking. His body was long, lean, and perfectly built for his fighting style. He had a tight core, long arms and legs, and the way he moved looked like a mix of dancing and fighting. Silva made fighting look like art. He dodged punches like he was in the Matrix and landed kicks and knees with sniper accuracy. For years, nobody could touch him, and he held the UFC middleweight belt for the longest time in history. But time hits everyone, even legends. After leaving the UFC in 2020, Silva went into boxing and fought big names like Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. and Tito Ortiz. In these fights, people noticed a big change in how he looked. His shoulders weren't as sharp, and his arms looked thinner. His chest lost some muscle, and overall, he looked softer and older.
And Anderson again trying for that Kimura, but Chael's on top riding him. And notice he doesn't put the hooks in. He just rides. He rides the back. That way when Anderson turns, if Anderson tries to throw him into his guard or attack...
The energy in his body was different too. He didn't bounce around the same way. Even his famous upright fighting stance seemed more relaxed, like he was saving his energy instead of exploding into action. His face showed it too. More wrinkles, puffier cheeks, and tired eyes. He still had that Silva confidence, but physically, the speed and sharpness had faded. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss more stories like this. And tell us in the comments, which fighter's transformation surprised you the most?